live and direct, live on the set. Thank you, everybody, for checking in. For those of you who are with us, what are we talking about tonight? We're talking about American culture. Culture is an extremely important conduit of the way of how people live their lives. Culture is going to reflect the mentality, the attitude. Culture is going to reflect the way of thinking, the way of living, and what's going on at that particular time in the world, in that particular area, that community, that state, that city, that township, that country, that continent. What is culture? And culture is something that is artistic, it's an expression. There is such a thing as an American culture. There is such a thing as any culture. Every country is going to have their own culture. Every organization is going to have their own culture, things that's specific to them or they may take a particular liking to more so than other places. That's what goes on in culture. So when you're talking about American culture, what are some of the things that make up American culture? If I ask you what makes up American culture, some people may say freedom. Some people may say democracy. Some people may say the Bill of Rights. That makes up American culture. Some people may even say, what makes up American culture is capitalism, right? The free market. There's many things that is going to make up culture. But the question for tonight is, does America promote a particular culture that is degrading to women? Does America promote? Now, this doesn't mean every single facet of America. This doesn't mean that everywhere in America people are in favor of it. But does America make way? Does it give an allowance for the degrading of women? Typically, when we hear things regarding women, when women are viewed or treated negatively, it typically comes from, thank you so much, that painting is called Wired, original DMC art. I appreciate that. I'll make sure I pass the word. Beautiful artist, beautiful, beautiful artist. I've been supporting their artwork for quite some time. What's going on? Appreciate all you guys for checking in the chat. So in American culture, is there a devaluing of women? We obviously see, coming off of this political climate, we saw the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Appreciate you guys. Thank you. Nice hat. A little something, something, nothing too special. Nevertheless, we see the Vice President, Kamala Harris, right? That is a woman who achieved the second highest office in the land. She ran for the highest office in the land, right? The country didn't necessarily pick her because she was able to take on that position because the president, Joe Biden, had said that he was going to step down, which, by the way, he said Jesus Christ would have to tell him to step down, and that's how he would back out of the race. I don't know if Jesus Christ told Joe Biden that, only he would know. Maybe one day he'll share that with us. But nevertheless, we saw a woman, Kamala Harris, run for the highest office in the land, the President of the United States. So would you get the impression that America promotes the devaluing or the downgrading of women if you see a successful woman at such a high level in this country? I would think you may say no. How could that be? They're Fortune 500 companies that's ran by women, and they do a magnificent job. There's leagues that's ran or predominantly women, and they're very successful in their craft, in their talent. The inclusion of women in society, and when I say in society, meaning as far as the ones who are running society, but the inclusion of women in society changed language. These are all things that's good. So in the past, you would say a waiter, which typically would have been a male, and then you would have said a waitress. Hello, my brother. I'm Brazilian. That's right, fellow South American. Could you send me a message in Brazilian? I do not know how to speak Portuguese, my friend. So I don't know how I would go about doing that because I don't know how to speak Portuguese. But I definitely appreciate the love from my Brazilian brothers and sisters. But back to the point, the question is, you used to have a waiter, which would have been a male, and you would have had a waitress, right? Now it became more so politically correct or respectable to say a server, because it's not like a woman's version of the actual occupation. It's a woman doing it. So you didn't just have a stewardess. You didn't want to have the woman's version when you're talking about taking a flight. So then they said, all right, flight attendant, and that'll cover both. So that brings a certain level of status and respect to a woman who is fulfilling that occupation. Cool, my bro, we're together. I'm now living in Los Angeles, California. I hope you're doing safe, Robert, from the fires. I know it's a lot going on in Cali, especially in the LA area. So I definitely hope you're doing well over there and your loved ones and your friends are doing well as well. So you would see that America would play a particular role to ensure that as far as when it comes to language, there is a respectful language that's going to cover men and women, and there's going to be this inclusivity when it comes to women. All of that is good. Nobody can deny that. It's actually a false narrative that when you go back in the past, that caveman culture was actually the world culture. That was never the world culture. Cavemen were never, Neanderthals were never the ones who were dictating the world on how to operate and how to deal with one another. That's just simply not true. That's simply historically inaccurate, right? Now, were there times in history where women were looked at certain ways over certain things and they carried a certain reproach? Yes, absolutely. There's reasons for that. Some of those reasons go back to like the beginning of time. And then when you actually get around to the time of Jesus Christ walking the planet Earth, you see a change in the way of how women were viewed, and you see the value of women rising because of the fact of how Jesus Christ dealt with women according to Scripture. Just some little historical context right there. But with that being said and done, bringing it to today in America, you will see that you could watch a basketball game. There could be a woman's head coach. There could be a woman's referee, right? Most certainly the ones who are supporting the NBA. You can't watch an NBA game without just so happening to catch women all throughout the stands. It doesn't matter if they're in the suites, or it doesn't matter if they're courtside, or it doesn't matter if they're in the middle somewhere. You're going to see a heavy dose and representation of women when it comes to the moving and shaking in society. So could it still be the case that while you see women handling their business, being knockout artists as they're being, in society, can it still be the case that America promotes the devaluing of women, the degrading of women, the way of viewing women in a sexual manner, but in a particular manner that is more so spread out for everyone? So it's not in a private, intimate setting. It's more so as if this is what they represent. And it's okay if they represent this as long as they're the ones who choose to do it. So it's not degrading if you choose to do it. Now, if you are being exploited, especially by a man, well, society might look at that as bad. But if you were doing the very same things that a man might have been doing to exploit you, if you yourself are doing it and you're reaping the, if you want to call it, benefits of it, is that okay? Well, in American culture, that seems to be okay. But is that good overall for women? Some of you may say, well, what the hell does a man have to do with a woman? The answer to that question is easy. Because I'm a man. You can't have a man without having women. You can't have a woman without having a man. You can't have a girl without having a boy. We go hand in hand. We're not strangers to one another. There's certain sects in society which will try to make us seem like we're strangers to one another. But boys and girls are born babies in the same family. You don't only have a family of only girls. Like, that's not how it is. Like, there's girl families and then there's boy families. No, you have families that they're going to have sons and daughters. You have families that may only have one daughter or all girls. And you have a family that may only have all boys. But life has never been the case where men are all the way over here and women are all the way over there and boys are here and girls. That's never been the case. We've always intermingled. It took your parents to have you. And even if you weren't raised by your parents, you might have been raised by one with another family member. You still were raised amongst the sexes. You were raised amongst boys and girls, men and women. So we're always here for one another, right? Certain societies and certain ideologies and doctrines in societies like to break us apart and separate us and have us thinking that we're really enemies to one another and we hate one another and we're always going to be fighting like cats and dogs. I just named a few events in society and things in culture where you're going to find men and women present, like a basketball game, a baseball game, a volleyball game, a sporting event, a movie theater, a shopping center, a place where food is sold, the park, the library. How many places can I actually name that you're not going to find both men and women all in that same place? It's going to be difficult to not come up with those places. And of all of those places, where is it that among them the men are completely separated from the women and they're not intermingling? Where is that at? Or when the men are there and then the women show up, the men go, oh, hell no, and they get up and they walk out. It doesn't happen. So in society, we're commingling, we're mingling amongst one another. We're in the same habitat with one another. So we're obviously involved with one another. So that notion that we're supposed to be against one another and men want the worst for women and stuff like that, that's just not true. If we really were enemies to one another, then we wouldn't be here because we would have died out. The only way how we have life, the cycle of life on earth, is from the relations between men and women. That's how we have life. That's how life goes on, right? So we're here for one another. Now, going back to the point, though, when you see the society of which we live in, you will see there are things that men do that's wrong, that's bad. And that's pretty much understood by everyone in society that it's not a good thing. It's not necessarily a thing that's celebrated openly. You may have pockets in society that'll celebrate that particular behavior. Let's talk about a man who's promiscuous, right? A man who has many relationships with women. That particular man, he may be celebrated amongst other men, but that particular man won't necessarily be received by society as a hero if he was to try to just put it out on the forefront and try to act as if he is the same as a man who's in a monogamous relationship, a man who's in a relationship with one woman. So if a man is in a relationship with one woman, that man can let the world know that that's his girlfriend or that's his wife, right? And then whatever's the benefits, she'll receive those benefits of such. He could speak and speak on his wife's behalf, and his wife can show up on his behalf, and she has certain legal rights to things, and there could be a parking spot, and the parking spot is accessible to both husband and wife. But if you have a man who just sleeps around with multiple women, all of those women can't get whatever it is that that man gets, right? Society won't accept that. There's no provisions for that, right? There just isn't. Even societies when there's a polygamy, where there is a man who may have more than one wife, those are still wives. Those just aren't mistresses, right? Those just aren't one wife and 1,001 girlfriends. Those are going to be women who he has relationships with. So because this reoccurring and this consistent and constant relationship this man has with these women, then they have access to a degree of the things of what that man has. And you see that in many cultures throughout the world, right? Now, if you were to then say, well, we've reached a point in time, this was something that was big in the 90s. We reached a point in time where, as a woman, if a man was to sleep with more than one woman, he would be looked at as a guy, he'd be a player. But if a woman was to sleep with more than one man, then she'll be looked at negatively. She'll be looked at as a whole. Now, who are the women who sleep with multiple men? Is that something that is a positive thing for women to do it? Because in that particular line of reasoning, you're not taking an upstanding man to say if a woman acts like him, then she won't be received the same way how he was received. You're picking a man who's devaluing himself plus others, right? That's what you're doing. So why pick a negative man to look as that as a come up in society for women, right? So where are we going as far as the moral standing if we were to tell women, well, it's okay to go ahead and sleep with whoever it is you want to sleep with and however many men you want to sleep with? It was bad when men were doing it. So why would it be okay for women to do it? If a man was just sleeping with multiple women and he's not in a committed relationship and he's just out and about with whomever, there are many negative drawbacks because of that actual behavior. There's societal downfalls because of that behavior. There are going to be children who are born out of those relationships. And those children are never going to have a strong foundation because they're not coming from a relationship that was built on commitment or love or respect. They're coming from a relationship or an interaction that's solely based on lust. So how does that better society? How does that better those children? How do those children benefit from that type of upbringing and that type of foundation? If that's the bedrock of these particular children, how is that optimal for their growth and development in life? Parents who don't even like one another because lust wears off. It's not long lasting, it's short term. and it doesn't deal well with responsibility. So it was being promoted, and this was something big in the 90s, that as long as a woman is okay with doing it, then it's good. We need to make way for women to do that. And that's bad. I got to be very transparent. That's very bad because it's not good for anyone to do it. Because it doesn't matter if it's a man who's looking to just sleep with multiple women, or if it's a woman who's looking to sleep with multiple men, the outcome is going to be the same. Now, the thing about it is there's biological differences between a man and a woman that we just cannot escape. We just can't escape it. Regardless of how much we advance in modern medicine and in society, and regardless of how much norms may change and we're ever evolving, there's certain biological things that you just cannot escape. Just like I'm not going to be able to escape the fact that my hands are at the end of my arms. They're not here at the shoulder. They're at the end of the wrist. That's a biological norm. I can't escape it. So we try our best, we meaning society, not everybody in agreement with it, but we try our best to change things or to act as if things have seriously changed. And now we can go about it this way, and we can rid ourselves of the past, when the past is what got us here. It's like a frog looking at a tadpole and disrespecting tadpoles. If it wasn't for tadpoles, you wouldn't be a frog. It's like a caterpillar being looked at as ugly by the butterfly. But you wouldn't be a butterfly unless there were caterpillars. It's like the chicken despising the egg. You wouldn't have been a chicken without the egg. So why do we as people think that our past and the forms and the ways of how we were in the past is so detestable and we need to change it? Based off of what? Where does that come from? So to look and say, well, this is about the advancement of women in society, but you're talking about them being promiscuous. You're talking about the prestige and the valuing of women and the level of protection that a woman would receive just based on being who they are in society, being an upstanding, law-abiding woman in society. It's a societal norm that that woman gets protected. That's a societal norm. But if society is going to dictate to you what basically is the case, and it goes without saying. So you'll now have, the way how the world is today, you'll now have women who complain about lack of protection. But women in the past didn't complain about not being protected in their own community. That's because the community was more tight-knit. Women were not just out and about at any hour of the night, and people weren't checking to make sure that they were okay. Unless you were working and you were maybe a doctor, a nurse. As time went on, women got more involved in law enforcement. Women typically weren't out late at night. It was known that women were not out late at night. Career-driven women, for the most part, were really not out. They weren't really on shifts that were late at night. Now, am I saying that a woman should not have a shift at night and she can't maintain herself and get back and forth safely? No, not saying that at all. But the more you step outside of certain confines, the more you put yourself at risk. That's just common sense. The more you drive, the more ability or possibility is there to get into a car accident. People drive to get to work, but you just have to understand that if you're going to drive to get to work, you're putting yourself at risk at a potential car accident happening because you're on the road. And I'm not saying that about women, I'm just saying that in general. So the more you do, the more of what comes along with it, both good and bad. So in the past, you could not just come into a neighborhood and think you would just knock on various doors looking for the women in the neighborhood. Somebody's going to question you, right? You couldn't just find a woman and say, oh, I want you. Hey, you in that window up there, come outside and come talk to me. You couldn't have that happen, right? You couldn't have that happen. And what happens is, if you say, well, it's women's empowerment, for the woman to go, well, I don't need to be in an apartment or in a house waiting for a man to come find me. I can go out and go find that man. Yes, you can. But when you go out and you go find that man, keep in mind you're stepping outside of those same societal norms and the things that come along with it. So now if you're out and you're socializing and it's just a bunch of young ladies out with their friends, yeah, just like a bunch of young men, you're putting yourself at risk, or you're putting yourself in a position where you could be stereotyped, right? People would say law enforcement, look out, it's a group of black men, young black men partying, having a good time. And they may be worried about getting pulled over by the cops. If they were all in each other's house, enjoying themselves there, that particular possibility is kind of non-existent. So the same thing goes with someone else. If you're a group of young ladies, you're out, you're partying, you do so on a regular basis, you're putting yourself in a position where these things can come along with it. So society now, is it society's responsibility to protect these young ladies that are out? Now, some women are going to look at that like, well, why do you think I can't protect myself? If I chose to be out, if I chose to go and party on a Thursday night, I take on that responsibility myself. Just because I'm a woman, that doesn't mean that I need Frank and Billy and Bob and Thomas and whoever to be outside to protect me. I'm a grown adult. But when something goes bad, when something goes wrong, remember you had the woman who falsely accused the man of hitting her in the face with the brick face. When something goes bad, who are you looking for to rush to your aid? Now, you see, there's certain things that's just intertwined with our being. So it's natural for women to look for men to protect them. That's a natural thing. Just like it's natural for children to expect an adult to protect them or to educate them. But if a child sneaks out late at night and is out and about when only adults should be out, that child can't expect the same protections as they would get during the day because they're putting themselves at risk, right? They're putting themselves in a position where you have to take this on and know what it is you're getting yourself into. If a man is going to say, well, you know what? I'm going to step out of my particular element and I want to go out into the woods somewhere and I want to do extreme sports somewhere, right? You're putting yourself outside of the societal norms of what everybody else does. So if something happens to you, it's going to take a long time for some aid to come to find you. It's going to take a long time for a first responder to get to you in the woods because you're not on Main Street going to work. You've secluded yourself from society. You've put yourself in a position amongst less people. So if something goes wrong, you're on your own, buddy. You can't expect EMS to just come in the lights. Woo, woo, woo. You can't expect that because you're way far out, right? So you're putting yourself in a position where you have to deal with it. So is America putting women in a position where they will have to deal with stuff solely to themselves? But when women find themselves in a situation when hardships arise, we're talking about on the moment, when these hardships arise on the moment, are they then expected to just deal with it on their own? Is that what they're expecting? I don't think so. I don't see that. I see them looking or complaining that something bad happened to them and either men watched or no man did anything. You'll see a video of a woman on the train and she's being harassed. And then people would comment, look at all of that men who did, all of those men there who didn't do anything. So again, this is what it is that comes with all of these changes in society. You're going to get the good, you're going to get the bad. There's going to be things you're going to have to forfeit. There's going to be things you're just going to lose out on because it's no longer the case. It's just not the case. Times have evolved. There's certain notions about, and this was big in 2024, there was this wave of just nonsense about telling women not to be so men-centered. Don't be men-centered. I don't know what society that is. I have not seen in America where women today are men-centered. I don't see that. And when I see gatherings of places of women, I don't see the force of entertainment being men for women. I don't see women calling on men to entertain them. When I see men gather themselves in one place, I see that men look for women to be pleasing to them. Even in male-dominated arenas, for example, sports, I see when I watch a football game, they're cheerleaders. Those cheerleaders are women. I see when I watch a basketball game, they're cheerleaders, even when it's a high school level, like I was at my son's basketball game earlier today. The cheerleaders were the female students. I see when I see music, I see that in a video for music, there's typically a lady, right? Like the main character in the video. Or there is going to be a spread of women in the video. So I see when men get together, or if even an individual man who may be successful, I see there's going to be some form of gathering of women in a celebratory fashion that goes hand in hand with men. I don't see that with women. I've never seen a woman's volleyball game and all of the cheerleaders are men. I just haven't seen it. So I don't see women being centered around men. Stop being men-centered, and we've got to put off men, and 4B movement. All of that was just a bunch of nonsense that it was just like a bad smell. You know, when you're out somewhere and you just get a bad smell, it just came, it just smelled terrible, and it just went off away, and it just vanished. And you can't get that smell back, right? Because it was just momentarily, it felt horrible, right? Your senses are there, you'll remember it a little bit, but eventually it'll fade. And that's what a lot of these things are. It's a lot of these just frameworks trying to break women down and trying to get them to separate themselves from a moral identity. And this idea that the more you're involved with men, as long as it's at your particular whim or your particular preference, then you're becoming empowered. I don't necessarily see that. I can't agree with that. And this isn't against women's empowerment. This is against the idea that the more women act like men or we act like one another, that in itself is empowering for women. Not having a job and driving. But as far as sleeping with random people, how is that empowering? You have in American culture, certain parts of the country, prostitution is legal. Prostitution is the actual selling of sexual favors for compensation, for monetary gain. Either the physical acts or the idea of it, the appearance of it, that all falls under the definition of prostitution. A prostitute was looked at as somebody who was low in society. That was someone who people did not want in their society if it was an upstanding society. People knew that that was uncivil behavior. The one who you would say is quote unquote responsible or managing the prostitute, the pimp, or a whoremonger, that particular individual would also be looked at in a degrading way by society. You didn't want those people just out and about in your neighborhood because that devalues your neighborhood. It's only leading to unsavory behavior. And you're drawing out the people in that society that are willing to partake in this uncivil sexual behavior. That's who you're drawing out, right? That's who the prostitute and the pimp, that's who they interact with. They don't interact with the upstanding people in society. They don't look for the market of the high moral value people in society. They look for the people who are willing to compromise their morals, or for those who just don't have any, for a good time. But something changed, because while it appeared to be that the ones in society that were building these establishments and these safe havens for women who had the misfortune of being caught up in that lifestyle, the appearance just a few decades ago, the appearance was that they were about protecting and saving those women from that horrific way of living, and educating them and getting them the proper health care and letting them know that they actually had options in life. But the outcome was not that. The outcome was, well, as long as you're compensated for the very same things of what you went through in the past, but in the past, the money was going to a man. But as long as now that money goes to you, then everything is okay. And now you're not just a tramp or a lady of the night or other derogatory terms. You're now an industry worker, a SEX industry worker. But that particular title, why did it only apply to the women when in the same industry you had the men? See that? In the very same sex industry, you had the men who were managing the women, and you had the women who were committing the acts with the men of that particular society. So the men who were committing the acts with the women, the customers, society viewed them as bad. The men who were managing the women and taking advantage of them financially, they were viewed as bad. But a level of sophistication was given to the women in the society who were committing the acts, the sexual acts, for the financial gain. And they were then now identified as sex workers. How? The industry involves all three of those components. All three of those components are negative. All three of those components are uncivil and bad. The presence of all three of them does not mean you're in an upstanding society. You can't take away one and then it's going to be good. No, it's still bad. And if you just change, well, we're going to change the way of how we look at the women who are involved in that industry, and we're now going to say they're actual workers. What changed about what it was that they were doing? What changed about the devaluing of themselves? The most intimate parts of their being is your actual body. So what changed that you said, well, I'll give my body to a man for $40? How did it get any better? How was that the upliftment or the changing of the way we view women by that? How was that an improvement? So it's like, well, exploit yourself. If you exploit yourself, then everything is good. Let's get the men out of the way. But the same act is being committed. That's putting that woman's health at risk over and over and over and over and over again. That's continuing to put the men in the society who are willing to be uncivil with that uncivil woman. That's putting those multitudes of men, those multiple men, that's continuing to put them at risk because they're putting themselves at risk. And then if they may be connected to a loved one who's unaware that they're getting caught up in these activities at night, like if these men are married, now their wives are at risk and their children are at risk. So how is this actually good? How are we getting anywhere? Again, with all the modern medicine, all you constantly keep seeing is sexual outbreaks in cities. And majority of these cities where you see these sexual outbreaks, these diseases, to be clear, these sexually transmitted diseases and infections that's spreading in cities, they're spreading in cities where the sexual marketplace is high. So the more you say, hey, just go ahead and do, as long as you choose to do it and nobody's forcing you to do it, you're not leading to positive outcomes. You're ending up with negative outcomes still. So it wasn't about whether or not you were forced, you were coerced, you were kidnapped. It was about it was bad. You got to be against the system altogether. You got to be against the market altogether. You can't change the face and think, well, if we change the face, then it's going to be good. No. Anytime you see a place that is sexually exploited, when you see these places, majority of the individuals who you see being arrested and detained are women. So many times the ones that is forcing these women into these acts and into these horrific conditions is women who are working with men to do it. So the threat to the victim is other women and men. It's not solely men. It's men who would do evil, do bad to them, and it's women who would do evil and do bad to them and kidnap them and basically enslave them. And sometimes there's things done when they're coming from another country, and it's basically like they're selling themselves into debt. And some of these women have a husband, they have children back in the country of which they come from. And sometimes their husband knows what it is that they're getting involved in America. Right? The exploitation of these women. So you see it where either it's happening from another force, a greater force, that's the subculture that has a stronghold on women in that particular society. And they may find themselves, they don't have the best resources. They don't have the best care for themselves. and they live under a tumultuous government that may actually force these women into these acts or to being involved in this market, this horrific market, this inhumane way of living. But you see, the very same thing is happening, but it becomes empowerment if a woman says, well, I'll go ahead and do the same thing that that woman who was taken against her will, I'll do the same thing, but I'm open with it. I'm the one who's behind it. So how is that still not the devaluing of women? And you're talking to a person who's married to a woman. You're talking to a person who was born of a woman. You're talking to a person who raises girls to become women. So yeah, you better have something to say over what's going on in this society that your daughters live in. You better have an opinion. You better take a stance over what it is that's going on in this world. And you better be able to identify and recognize the threat to your precious daughter. Because the threat to your daughter, the threat to my daughter, is not just a boy. It may very well be a girl. It may very well be a woman. It may very well be a teammate. It may very well be someone who goes in the bathroom with her. It may very well be someone who she looks at as somebody who she could trust, but somebody who's just like her. That's who their threat may be. Because again, we're putting our precious girls, our precious women in these spaces where they're more and more at risk. And we're lying to them and we're telling them it's empowering to them. Now, some of you may not like the fact, what do you mean women are precious? What do you mean by that? They're precious. You mean women are just soft and delicate and, oh, handle them like this or they'll just break? No. When something is precious, it's rare. Now, women by far outnumber men when it comes to population, but there is something particular about women when it comes down to the biology. Women can only bring forth one at a time. So a woman could only bring forth the child, even if she has more than one child at the same time, like twins, triplets, whatever, she could only bring forth the child or children of one man, one at a time at least. A man can get himself involved in multiple partners, women, and he can bring forth multiple children with his multiple partners, all at the same time, or they can be staggered. So if you take the 9-month period of which a woman is going to be pregnant, you know how many women that man can impregnate within that 9-month period? So that woman who is pregnant for that 9 months, she can't get pregnant again while she's pregnant. She's not going to have another child. She can't add a baby to the pregnancy that she already has. Right? So yeah, women are very precious. They're very delicate in that sense. Doesn't mean, oh, my nails. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where it is biologically that they fit in society and where it is biologically that men fit in society. This is the reason why a woman, when she's married to a man, she takes the name of that man. Because she's continuing the lineage of that man. She's no longer continuing the lineage of her father. She's now continuing the lineage of her husband. So, yes, women are extremely valuable. But for some reason, you have the ills of a society that always want to take advantage and to deceive women. And it happened in the very beginning with the devil and Eve because of her inquisitive mind and the devil taking advantage of that inquisitive mind to try his damnedest to get her to believe that there was something better for her than what was. But she never found better. And ironically, in the world of which we live in today, is constantly being pumped, pushed, promoted to women that there is something better for them. And they have to get as far and as far and as far and as far and as far away from men. That's the only way you can obtain it. If you have a man, get away from him. If you're interested in men, get away from them. Get as far away, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, get as far away from them, and you're going to enter into this state of nirvana. That's the dumbest thing in the world the devil can actually tell a woman. That's not what you see. So, do we need one another? Absolutely. Does America have, for whatever reason, this uncanny thing, societal push about getting women to devalue themselves? Yeah, they do. And hopefully you guys have been able to get that and see that throughout time, that's being pushed on women to be that way. But we're still going to expect things of one another because that's who we are, regardless of how we may look at ourselves or we may hear this new initiative or this new way of thinking over how it is that we are. What is really new? What is really new? My nose is still here in the center of my face and my eyes are still up here. What's really new that we're experiencing? Yeah, there's going to be advancements in technology, but it's still the same old me and the same old you that has to operate those advancements in technology. We still have to do the same exact things we were doing before. We're just doing it in a different way. It just appears to be different, but it's still the same methodology. It's still the same practice. In the past, people walked to work. Then eventually they took a horse and a buggy. And then after that, we started being able to take public transportation. But we still had to go to work. Like it didn't change. So instead of everybody just walking down that particular path and down that dirt road and everybody went that way and there was just caravans and droves of people going that way, now we're able to go underground. Some people take an airplane to get to work every day. Some people take a helicopter, right? People ferry and shuttle back and forth to work in various different ways. But they still have to get to work. So is the person who's flying to get to work, are they truly that much better than the one who took a horse or a mule to get to work in the past? How much better are you than them when it's all relative because they had to take a means of transportation to get to work and you're doing the same thing. You're just paying more for it. So what's changing? Right? So it's like the more things change, the more they remain the same. So just because in the past, society would have automatically let it be known that absolutely not, we're not accepting that of the women in our culture. We don't want our young ladies growing up and behaving that way. That just because in the past people were actually saying it, and maybe today people may be afraid to say it, because of how they're going to be perceived as if they're saying something wrong. The same things of what people were worried about happening in the past, it's happening now. So you can't say as if there was a protection that came about on various members in society the more they started to live their lives at risk. No, we didn't see that. All we saw was things got worse. That's what we saw. So there is a way for men and women to deal with one another, respectfully, for women to be protected assets in the community while being forerunners in a community. They don't need to be in the background. They can be right up in the front in a respectable way while conducting business, while tending to their households. And it doesn't have to come about by promiscuity. It doesn't have to come about by scandal. It doesn't have to come about by controversy. It doesn't have to come about by sexual exploitation. That's just simply not true. So we appreciate all you guys for rocking with us tonight. We appreciate you guys in the chat. We want to salute all of you guys in LA. Hopefully you guys are well. Everybody from the foreign countries that checked in tonight, salute to all of y'all. Appreciate all of you guys. Cast Their Crowns, Inc. Does America promote loose culture? You let us know.